people? Welcome back to the OCM Botcast. Yes, I know we are finally back. Oh man, I know you guys miss me. Oh man, it's great to be back. So it's a new year and the OCM Botcast is finally back. And I'm definitely going to make sure I get even more of these episodes out this year. So look forward to that. We're going to have a great, productive, fruitful year. And that's for certain. Make sure you guys attack the like button. Check out my other social media and let's get to it. So this podcast is called Coach Red Pill and the War in Ukraine. And so I've been looking forward to doing this for quite a while because this is a very interesting topic. Now, you guys know that there's been a war in Ukraine for the past, 2 years or so between Russia and Ukraine. And there are a lot of different opinions about this war. It's not exactly a straightforward war with a clear good and evil side the more you delve into the specifics. And one thing about Coach Red Pill, and he's really the central figure here of this podcast. This isn't just about the Ukraine war. That'd be kind of boring. But Coach Red Pill is a central figure to this to me because he was in the Ukraine right when the war jumped off, and he was giving like inside coverage of what was going on and what his perspective was on the war. And even from the very beginning, he gave a very controversial perspective to say the least, because he almost came across as a Russian sympathizer. And I'm sure at the time that seemed pretty extreme. Now, not so much. I'm seeing more and more people kind of realizing the truth behind this war and that it's not as simple as it seems. So I'm going to be, talking about various specific key points of the war initially. And then we are going to actually look at Coach Red Pill's first video that he put out right when the war jumped off. And we're going to see if his predictions were on the money or not. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence pointing in the direction that he might be dead now, because when he started putting out this content, he got on the radar of the Ukraine army and government. And they started harassing him because they felt like he was spreading pro-Russian propaganda. A lot of people would say it was very foolish of him to even put out the videos they was putting out while he was there in the Ukraine. And so it's well known that he's been stuck in the Ukraine for, pretty much ever since the beginning. If anybody had a chance of getting out, it probably would have been him, considering that I don't think he was a Ukrainian citizen. But I'm not exactly sure because he was in America for quite a while. But whatever the case may be, he didn't end up being able to leave the country. They detained him, and apparently he got quote unquote sick and died recently. Again, I don't know how true that is, but a lot of evidence is pointing in that direction. And his father was recently on a podcast, I think, and some people say he confirmed it. I got to do a little bit more research into it, but it seems like, unfortunately, he might really be deceased at this point. So, this episode is going to mostly be about his interpretation of the Ukraine war against Russia and see how many of his predictions actually came true. But before that, we got to get to some news.
This plague, the rioting is intensifying to the point where we may not be able to contain it.
Why contain it? Let it spill over to the schools and churches. Let the bodies pile up in the streets. In the end, they'll beg us to say that.
And I think it's really only appropriate that the news also be about the war in Ukraine, because the thing is, most of the key points I'm going to talk about as far as this war is going to be revolving around things that have already happened. And so for the news of the day, I want to just give you guys the latest update on the Ukraine-Russia war, which is the battle over Avdiivka. Now, forgive me if I pronounced that wrong, which I'm fairly certain I did. But this is pretty much where the war is at right now. So we're going to read this article here and see exactly what's going on. So this came from the BBC, and the title is, or the headline is, Ukraine-Russia war, U.S. warns Avdiivka could fall. Okay, so the U.S. has warned, look, this picture here. I would die here. Evacuation angels help frontline towns, last residents flee. Oh, damn. Okay. So the U.S. has warned that Russia could seize Ukraine's key eastern town of Avdiivka, the scene of some of the fierce fighting in recent months. Avdiivka is at risk of falling into Russian control, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said, citing Ukraine's ammunition shortages. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed to do everything to save as many Ukrainian lives as possible. Russian troops have made gains in Avdiivka, threatening to encircle it. The town, which has been almost completely destroyed, is seen as a gateway to nearby Donetsk, with the regional Ukrainian capital seized by Russian-backed fighters in 2014 and later illegitimately annexed by Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February in 2022. And so when you look at the map of Avdiivka, because I've seen it, it looks really bad because maybe I can pull it up in post-production, but essentially you see Avdiivka surrounded as like the Russian forces are slowly surrounding it. So it's like it would be in the center here, and then the Russian troops are just coming up that way and down that way, almost to the point where they're completely going to circle them. And you get all types of conflicting reports. Like, of course, there's been a lot of criticism, at least from within the alternative media, about the Zelensky regime's conscription policies and how they pretty much has been sending a lot of young men to their deaths. And so apparently, I could be wrong, but you hear things like they're told not to retreat, even though it's looking worse and worse. So essentially, once they get fully encircled, they're going to have no choice but to either surrender or to fight to the death. And so it continues and says, at Thursday's briefing in Washington, Mr. Kirby said Avdiivka could fall largely because the Ukrainian forces on the ground are running out of artillery ammunition. Russia is sending wave after wave of conscript forces to attack Ukrainian positions, he said. And because Congress has yet to pass the supplemental bill, we have not been able to provide Ukraine with the artillery shells that they desperately need to disrupt these Russian assaults. Russian forces are now reaching Ukrainian trenches in Avdiivka, and they're beginning to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. Earlier this week, the U.S. Senate approved a $95 billion foreign aid package, including $60 billion for Ukraine after months of political wrangling, but it faces an uphill battle in the House of Representatives. So this has been a much contested thing as far as like how much money we've been sending to the Ukraine, because, you know, popular belief from the very beginning has been that the Ukraine just doesn't have a chance of beating Russia. And you see a lot of different propaganda, and we'll talk more about this later. But it's known that in the Ukraine, they treat their casualties as a government secret. So they don't ever put out official numbers of their deaths. But it's estimated that they've had to have lost a lot of soldiers, because obviously they haven't been able to repel the Russian army yet. You know, a lot of people have criticized Vladimir Putin and the Russian army because this wasn't supposed to be like some long drawn out war, but they're still there. But the thing is, you know, typically speaking, if somebody is invading your country and they're digging their way deeper and deeper into it, that's usually not a good sign. And in order to properly defend yourself, like if they're still advancing, you're probably losing a lot of soldiers. It kind of reminds me a little bit of when Germany invaded Russia in World War II. Now, eventually Russia was able to just outman Germany and repel them, but not without taking a ridiculous amount of losses. I think the Russian army lost way more than the German army. But I can't say for sure because I'm not there. I'm not on the inside. But based on everything that I'm seeing, and when you look at like Vladimir Putin's body language, whenever you see him, he just seems so relaxed, like he knows what he's doing. And then when you see Zelensky, he looks stressed, he looks desperate, and just based off the vibe of the two sides, it's like I'm definitely in agreement with the idea that I just don't think the Ukraine is going to be able to win this war. And that's why a lot of people think just sending them all this money is a waste of time. You're sending them billions of dollars for a war that they're probably not going to win. And that's what they mean when they say months of political wrangling, because this is a hot topic over how much support should we really give to Ukraine at this point. And it continues, Ukraine is critically dependent on weapon supplies from the U.S. and other Western allies to be able to continue fighting Russia, a much bigger military force with an abundance of artillery ammunition. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned on Thursday that the U.S. failure to approve continued military assistance to Ukraine was already having an impact on the battlefield. I gotta be honest, I kind of hate talk like that because it puts the responsibility on the United States. When at the end of the day, the responsibility is on the Ukraine to defend itself. It's like, look, if you want to support Ukraine, that's on you. But I don't like this kind of rhetoric of, well, it's your fault. It's the United States' fault. No, it's not really our business. We made it our business. If you want to just say, okay, I want aid, cool. But I don't like the shaming language here of making it our responsibility by default. In his video address late on Thursday, President Zelensky said, "We are doing everything we can to ensure that our warriors have enough managerial and technological capability to save as many Ukrainian lives as possible." Just a quick side note. Every time I see this, I gotta be honest, I don't like Zelensky. I think he's a scumbag. And him and his administration, they're, dragging men off of the streets and forcing them into fighting this war. I've never thought much about conscription and like the draft. It's one of those things that I knew exists, but not something I ever really thought deeply about or worried about. But seeing it in action, when you see these videos of men literally being dragged off the street to be forced into a war that they know they can't win. Most people know they can't win, and recently the recent video I saw was like a whole village of people fighting off the press gangs or, the military personnel that come to, force people to fight. There are a lot of people who just don't want to fight in this war. And I can't, me personally, I'm against the draft in a general sense, or any sort of conscription. I can understand the sentiment of, if you believe in your country and you want to fight for it and you have other men that aren't willing to fight, I can get that, but still, to force somebody to fight in a war against their will, I think that's a serious conversation that we as men need to have. But maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I when he says stuff like that, I want to save as many Ukrainian lives as possible as you send men to the meat grinder. That doesn't make sense. On Friday, Mr. Zelensky is visiting Berlin and Paris, where he is expected to sign security pacts with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron. We got the same name. A similar agreement on security cooperation was signed between Ukraine and UK in January. Late on Thursday, Ukrainian General Alexander, is that like an alternative way of saying Alexander? Tarnovsky admitted that fierce battles were taking place within Avdiivka. "We value every piece of Ukrainian land, but the highest value and priority for us is the preservation of the life of a Ukrainian soldier," he said, as we send him to the meat grinder. Earlier in the day, Ukraine's military spokesman Dmytro Lychovy, I know I got that wrong, acknowledged that Ukrainian troops in Avdiivka were being forced to sometimes move to more advantageous positions, in some places leaving positions. Some Ukrainian soldiers have privately admitted the town could fall at any moment. "We're upset," Ukrainian official Aletsky from Ukraine's 110th mechanized, what, they got Gundams out there? Brigade in the Avdiivka area, told the BBC earlier this week, standing beside a huge mobile artillery piece as Russian guns boomed in the distance. Currently, we have 2 shells, but we have no explosive charges for them, so we can't fire them. As of now, we have run out of shells, said Oleski. He suggested that shortages were widespread and having a dramatic impact on the fighting in Avdiivka. We feel a very strong responsibility for our guys fighting right now in the town, armed only with assault rifles. Ukraine's newly appointed commander-in-chief, Alexander Serzysky, visited the front line in the Avdiivka area this week, acknowledging that the situation there was difficult. He said the Russian military did not count losses, using its troops as cannon fodder. Kiev says an elite Ukrainian brigade has now been sent to Avdiivka and reserve artillery has been deployed. In unverified reports, Russian military bloggers said on Thursday that a key Ukrainian defense position in southern Avdiivka, known as Zenit, was now under Moscow's control. And so you can see it right there. So I believe the red area on this map is considered to be territory that is controlled by Russia. And I think the areas that are red and white, I think those are combat zones. And I think the yellow is the Ukrainian forces holding up defenses. I don't know what the purple is. Do they have a map key? Okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah, red is Russian military control. Red and white, limited Russian military control, which means it must be contested somewhat. Let me see. Purple, held or regained by Ukraine. Okay, holding the line. Yellow, claimed Russian control. So is claimed Russian control, is that like areas where they had control and they lost it? Maybe that's areas where Russian had it and Ukraine was able to kind of push them back a little bit. But you see here, Avdiivka, this is it. That's not good. That's not good. It's basically very close to being surrounded. I don't know exactly how important that specific spot is, but it doesn't look good for them. Come on now. It's almost like you're getting eaten by a monster. Okay, so that's the article. So that's where we are now with the war in Ukraine. Now, I'll talk about this briefly because I did do a video on it, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But there was the video with Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin where he asked them bluntly, why did you invade the Ukraine? What were the circumstances that led to that? And in a nutshell, I'll just say that his reasoning was that, one, the Ukraine used to be a part of Russia at one point. Historically, it's been a part of Russia. And two, he didn't like how the Ukraine was starting to align itself with the West and NATO, and felt as if that would be a security risk for Russia and its people. So in a way, you could look at this war as an attempt to stop the spread of NATO from putting them at a disadvantage on the world stage. And it seems like whenever anyone is not just gung-ho about this war and thus sending as much money as possible to the Ukraine, that we're kind of looked at as being like Russian sympathizers or something like that. And I don't really think that's the case. I think in order for us to achieve more peace in the world, I think we got to really begin to zoom out and look at things from a bigger picture, because I think that a lot of us have drunk the Kool-Aid that America can do no wrong. We're the heroes of the world, and we don't have people in power who manipulate and control things and steer us in the wrong direction. I mean, just look at the war in Vietnam. Almost damn near unanimously as a people, we look back at that war as being something that we should have never participated in. So obviously that shows you that we're not this infallible country with the God-given, angel-appointed government officials who, steer us into different wars or this or that, And when I look at it now that I have a better picture of what happened, I really feel like it was gravely irresponsible of our government, of NATO, of the Ukraine to take the actions that they did, knowing what the risk was. Now, obviously, you would love for every country to be completely sovereign and be able to make the decisions as far as like where they align themselves. But I think it was very irresponsible of us to keep pushing it like that, thinking that Russia wouldn't do anything, because I can clearly see why they would want to ensure that the Ukraine is not going to align itself with NATO and the West when we could potentially be their most fierce enemy in an upcoming war somewhere down the line. And I feel like, looking at it from the Russian point of view, I think this was an act of trying to get ahead of being put at a potential disadvantage later down the line. So I get it strategically. Just like what we did when it came to Cuba with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Luckily, we were able to avoid war there, but we got very close to getting into war because Cuba aligned itself with Russia. We didn't like a country close to us, Cuba, aligning itself with a potential enemy, which was Russia, or I believe was the Soviet Union at the time, or USSR. They had so many damn names. But I'm just saying, I can see it from their point of view. We as Americans, we are not the main characters of Earth. And that's one thing that we have to realize. We can't just go around poking our nose everywhere and doing anything that we want to. Even after World War I, we started to adopt policies that would move us closer to being, I don't know if you would say isolationist, but we didn't want to get involved in another big war like World War I. And then during World War II, that's when we started to step outside of those bounds again, and then started to get involved. And then, now whether or not that was the right or wrong thing to do, right? Because you can look at it different ways. But the fact is, after World War I, we kind of took that stance, and then we changed that leading into World War II. And it seems like ever since then, we've just been kind of gung-ho. I believe after that, we had the Korean War, then you had Vietnam, then you had the Gulf War, and then the wars in Afghanistan and the Middle East. And now we're not directly involved in a war with our troops, but we're getting involved as far as like aiding countries like Israel and the Ukraine against their enemies. And, in a way, that's, if you think back to it, that's kind of how we got involved in World War II. It started with us cutting off the supply of oil to Japan, which was going to put them at a big disadvantage in the wars they were involved in. And, even though we didn't attack Japan first, our involvement as far as like cutting off their supply of necessary materials and whatnot, that was a big part of what motivated them to attack us. And so it shows you how large scale war can start just from sending aid or cutting off and sanctions and all that. It can escalate like that. So we got to be careful about that. And I'm just saying that I hate it more than anything for the people. And I always say this, and I'll say it again. Before this war started, the Russians weren't thinking about killing Ukrainians. The Ukrainians weren't thinking about killing the Russians. It's always people at the top that are making these decisions and then lead us against one another. And I think we, as the people, at some point, we got to really stand up and be in communication with each other. Don't let the multiple heads of the Hydra do all the talking. We're the body, we're the heart and soul of the country, and we got to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to get drugged in this bullshit. Because why are we killing people that we weren't thinking about yesterday? And why are they killing us? So I'm always against that aspect of it, But since we don't have that type of logic and communication and willingness to stand up to our own government in the levels that we would need to, if the Russians just said we're not going to war and the Ukrainians said, fuck you, we're not going to war, then it wouldn't be a problem. But we don't have that. And so what we have is the people at the top having to make these kind of decisions and being allowed to make these decisions. And so I'm just saying, I look at it like I can see strategically why Vladimir Putin did what he did. But I hate the fact that it had to come to this. But that was the news of the day. Next, we are going to get into some key points of the war in Ukraine. So make sure you guys Stay tuned. Be right back. Okay, so we are back and we are here to the main topic. So the main topic is going to be split into two parts, actually. Now, the first part, I'm just going to be covering, we're really reading a few articles. This is going to be an information dump more than anything else. And then the second half, we're going to analyze Coach Red Pill's video. So again, I just wanted to hit up and look at a few articles here so we can just learn a little bit more about this Ukraine war and how some of these facts will tie into Coach Red Pill's video. So this article here, it says U.S. and Ukraine search for a new strategy after failed counteroffensive. President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Washington at a critical moment, both on the battlefield and on Capitol Hill. So this is an important article because it talks about the counteroffensive and the failed counteroffensive. And so I believe it was last year in 2023 during the summer, the Ukraine, they attempted to turn the tide of battle by getting off of the defensive and going on the offense, and it failed miserably. And I think this is an important part of the war because I think it really shows the futility of the war as a whole, because the second they go into offense, they just end up getting slaughtered. But let's get into this. So American and Ukrainian military leaders are searching for a new strategy that they can begin executing early next year to revive Kiev's fortunes and flagging support for the country's war against Russia, according to U.S. and Ukrainian officials. Now, hold on. It says Kiev's fortunes and flagging support. So when they say flagging, are they saying, oh, okay. So I think at this point, they're starting to realize that people are not as naive or ignorant about the specifics of the war. And I remember initially most people were like, yeah, go get them, Ukraine. And now people are like, I really don't want to be sending these people money because we know they can't win the war. And it's a waste of life and it's a waste of resources. I think the narrative surrounding the war is starting to change, especially in other developed countries in the West. So it continues. The push for a fresh approach comes after Ukraine's months-long counteroffensive failed in its goal of retaking territory lost to the invading Russian army, and after weeks of often tense encounters between top American officials and their Ukrainian counterparts. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine arrived in Washington on Monday for a hastily arranged meetings this weekend with President Biden and Congress to discuss the way forward. The two presidents will attempt to demonstrate solidarity and bolster support for Ukraine at a critical moment, both on the battlefield and on Capitol Hill. Ukraine's setbacks have come as Republican support for continuing American financial assistance for Kiev has eroded. Even some senior U.S. officials have expressed worries that if the war falls into a long stalemate next year, President Vladimir Putin of Russia will gain the advantage. We can't let Putin win, Mr. Biden said last week as he pressed Congress for a new round of funding for Ukraine. It is in our overwhelming national interest and international interest of all our friends. Any disruption in our ability to supply Ukraine clearly strengthens Putin's position. And see, what bothers me about this again, and you know what, I'll say this, if the Ukraine wins this war, I'll eat my words. I will eat my words. If they pull this off without any sort of serious military intervention, and what I mean is, if we're able to help them win this war with just aid, how much it costs, I'll eat my words because I don't believe they can win this war, much like many other people. And that's why you see the support for this war falling and falling. And if they win again, I'll give them all the credit in the world. But what bothers me about Biden saying stuff like this is like, it's in our overwhelming national interest and international interest of all our friends to supply Ukraine, and it's like, don't you see how futile this battle is? And that's the problem, is like, you're wasting money. If you're of the belief that they cannot win this war, then that's what makes what he's saying so problematic. It's like, it's almost like he's lying to our face. Like, anyone with good sense knows that you're not going to be able to help them win this war just by sending them billions of dollars. You're talking like, Russia is a beast. Russia is an absolute monster on the world stage. Even when they were on the brink of defeat during World War II, I mean, they sent wave after wave after wave of soldiers to fiercely defend that. Like, don't get it twisted. Russia is very powerful. And like I said, man, I really get the sense like they aren't even fully in their bag as far as trying to win this war. I honestly think this is like light to moderate work for them. The Russian military, after its own failed drive to Kiev in 2022, has begun to reverse its fortunes and is rebuilding its might. Moscow now has more troops, ammunition, and missiles, and has increased its firepower advantage with a fleet of battlefield drones, many of them supplied by Iran, according to American officials. I've seen videos of these drones in actions, and from what I understand, they're like these, like, now I'm sure there are probably different versions of them, but I've seen some that really look like expensive toy helicopters. And they fly around, and then they can target an enemy or a group of enemies, fly into them, and then explode on detonation. And man, just imagine dying to some dumb shit like that. You're just out on the field, and you see this thing buzzing around, and it gets close to you. Start, like, I saw one where the guy was running around trying to avoid the drone, and then it ended up catching up to him and just exploded right behind him. I mean, it's really some, sad shit, but those drones are vicious. And so it continues. The United States is stepping up the face-to-face military advice it provides to Ukraine, dispatching a 3-star general to Kiev to spend considerable time on the ground. U.S. and Ukrainian military officers said they hope to work out the details of a new strategy next month in a series of war games scheduled to be held in Wiesbaden, Germany. And I think the other thing I don't like about our involvement is that I feel like this is going to further hurt our relationship with Russia. Any potential for peace is going to become harder and harder to achieve with this. Tucker Carlson, he's still in Russia right now. And man, I don't know if he's doing the right thing, but he's been really showing off how impressed he is with Moscow. And he was showing off the different, like the big difference between like prices of food in Russia versus America. And he showed how, like, he bought his normal amount of food that he would buy in America. And he said what would cost him $400 over here cost him $100 over there. Now, of course, there are different things you gotta take into consideration, like the income and whatnot of the average citizen there. But seeing that, I think that it's almost like people are starting to realize that a lot of our perception of what Russia is based on propaganda fed to us by our own government. And again, whether or not we're being bamboozled by an elite manipulator like Putin, I don't know. But again, what bothers me is that I feel like if we had any chance of establishing real peace with Russia, like, how are we going to do that when we're going against them more and more and more? And so it continues. The Americans are pushing for a conservative strategy that focuses on holding the territory Ukraine has, digging in and building up supplies and forces over the course of the year. The Ukrainians want to go on the attack either on the ground or with long-range strikes with the hopes of seizing the world's attention. The stakes are huge. Without both the new strategy and additional funding, American officials say Ukraine could lose the war. Administration officials argue that Mr. Putin is betting on diminished American support, pointing to his recent statements that if Ukraine runs out of NATO-provided ammunition, Russia would prevail in days. And when you look at Putin's approach, I think that's very accurate. And I think they hit the nail on the head with that one. I think if not for aid from other countries, this war would have been over by now. And depending on how you look at that, that can be a good or bad thing, because some people, they would rather the war just be over and then everybody can move on. You don't have all these people dying left and right, all these young men losing their lives. But then at the same time, you still got to consider the fact that, everybody isn't looking at it from that perspective, especially within Ukraine. Some people really are like, fuck Russia. I want to fight. And you got to remember that too. Everybody there isn't just being forced against their will. Some people are like, I love the Ukraine. I love President Zelensky. I want to defend my family. They're the invaders. So I can see that perspective as well. But I think without the aid, this war probably would have been over by now. The United States has given vast military and economic support to Ukraine, more than $111 billion over the past 2 years. But a significant number of Republicans now say they oppose further spending, and others are demanding to see a new strategy before they vote on any additional funds. Many Ukrainians leaders do not realize how precarious continued U.S. funding for the war is, American officials said. These Ukrainian generals and senior civilian officials have unrealistic expectations about what the United States will supply, they said. They're asking for millions of rounds of artillery, for example, from Western stockpiles that do not exist. American officials say Ukraine will have to fight on a tighter budget. Some in the U.S. military want Ukraine to pursue a hold and build strategy to focus on holding the territory it has and building its ability to produce weapons over 2024. The United States believes the strategy will improve Ukraine's self-sufficiency and ensure Kiev is in a position to repel any new Russian drive. The goal would be to create enough of a credible threat that Russia might consider engaging in meaningful negotiations at the end of next year or in 2025. And if the war must continue, that does sound like the best strategy. Because I don't think a counteroffensive is more likely to work against them if they attempt that. Again, if they're able to hold, and America, these other countries are willing to spend the money, then maybe it's possible that they can hold out long enough to where Russia, maybe it could be a situation where they essentially just wait Russia out and just hope they get tired beforehand. But if that's the case, then what you're going to have is a big loss of territory, because I seriously doubt Russia is just going to retreat completely and just let them roll back in. I don't think that's going to be the case, because you have all this new land and all this new potential for building and infrastructure and things like that. Even though I'm sure a lot of it has been destroyed and whatnot, certainly they didn't just blow up everything. They're not doing the scorched earth tactics that the Russians used during World War II. Real quick history lesson. During World War II, when Germany was advancing into Russia, they were kicking ass too. Part of what hurt them a lot was that they were betting on being able to resupply within Russia to live off the land, so to speak. But as the Russians were retreating deeper into the country, they had a policy of burning all the fields, burning the farmland, burning all the food, anything that the Germans could use to resupply. They had a policy of just destroying everything. And so as Germany got deeper and deeper into Russia, they found themselves more and more depleted of resources. And that was a key aspect of Russia being able to defeat Germany in World War II. So I'm pretty sure that Ukraine isn't doing that as they retreat, because I'm sure they will hope to get back to those territories that they lost. But again, this would be, if they must continue the war, probably the best strategy is to wait them out. I don't see a real possibility of repelling Russia out At best, they might have a split of Ukraine. Maybe Putin would become content with just having half of Ukraine. But even then, that's dangerous because you lose so much. And then Russia can just build there and then restart later, maybe 10, 20 years down the line. Who knows? But let's go to the next article here. Okay, so here we are going to talk about possible casualties. Now, there's a lot of misinformation regarding this, and we'll probably never know for sure. But we got two articles that we're going to look at briefly. One that says that Russia is taking heavy losses. The other saying that it might be bad on both sides. Excuse me. So let's take a brief look at both of these. And so the headline is U.S. intelligence assesses Ukraine war has caused Russia 315,000 casualties, source. And so a declassified U.S. intelligence report assessed that the Ukraine war has caused Russia 315 dead and injured troops, or nearly 90% of the personnel it had when the conflict began, a source familiar with the intelligence said on Tuesday. Now, I don't know, because maybe Russia just resupplied their troops quickly. But to me, that's the first red flag. How do you lose 90% of the personnel that you started with, but you've still been able to slowly but surely advance deeper and deeper within the country? That doesn't make sense to me. And again, it's possible that they could send more later. That's possible. But that to me, that right there, that don't even sound right off the jump. The report also assessed that Moscow's losses in personnel and armored vehicles to Ukraine's military have set back Russia's military modernization by 18 years, the source has said. And, a lot of people are saying that for us, this is pretty much just a proxy war. We're not betting on the Ukraine winning. This is more so a situation of weakening Russia as much as we possibly can. And I'm pretty sure Putin understands that. And it seems like that's why he's also taking a conservative approach to trying to win this war. Like they're willing to just take it slow and then take what they can when they can. So the Russian embassy referred a request for comment to the Russian Defense Ministry in Moscow. The ministry did not respond to requests for comment. Russian officials have said Western estimates of Russian death tolls in the war are vastly exaggerated and almost always underestimate Ukrainian losses, which Russian officials say are vast. But that's exactly what they would say. And the Ukraine is known that they treat their casualties as a government secret. So it's clear that in a situation of war, you don't really want to let the casualties be known, because that can have a heavy effect on morale. Like, just hypothetically, if you know that, let's just say, for instance, these were the facts, that only 50,000 Russian troops were killed while 400,000 Ukrainian troops were killed. Well, right there, that's going to destroy the morale of a lot of your soldiers who might not be in the know. Not only that, but it's going to make it harder to receive aid from countries that actually believe in you when they see you getting your ass kicked like that. And so I think there's a lot of self-interest in exaggerating and downplaying casualties when it comes to a situation like this. The source spoke as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a last-ditch plea for more military aid to U.S. lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where he faced a skeptical reception from key Republicans. At a news conference later in the day, U.S. President Joe Biden reaffirmed continued support to Zelensky and warned lawmakers they risk handing a victory to Russia. The source said the recently declassified U.S. intelligence report assessed that Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 with 360,000 personnel. Since then, the report found 315,000 Russian troops, or about 87% of the total with which it started the war, have been killed or injured, the source says. Again, that just sounds kind of sketchy, but who knows? The losses are the reason Russia has loosened recruitment standards for deployment in Ukraine, the source added. The scale of losses has forced Russia to take extraordinary measures to sustain its ability to fight. Russia declared a partial mobilization of 300,000 personnel in late 2022 and has relaxed standards to allow recruitment of convicts and older civilians, the assessment said, according to the source. Now, one thing I will say is that we see a lot of videos coming out from this war. And there have been these videos that have shown men with Down syndrome on the front lines and men who are clearly physically and mentally handicapped being handed draft notices. And so if you want to talk about desperation and relaxing the recruitment standards, you can't bring that up without mentioning the Ukraine. And then you see this video of new recruits into the Ukraine army, and it's just a bunch of older guys like in their 40s and 50s and stuff. And so that's why I have to take this article with a grain of salt, you know, is that because based off, like, I'm not seeing these things on the Russian side, like I'm seeing on the Ukrainian side. Like, I've heard of like recruitment buildings in Russia being set on fire or something like that. And that might be a sign of anti-war sentiment within Russia. But as far as like what we're seeing on the front lines, I mean, I'm seeing some goofy shit in the Ukraine. There was one video where the guys are like, you have a group of Ukrainian soldiers and they're going to the superiors basically saying, we quit. What's the punishment? 5 years in prison? Fine. We're not going out there to die. And they were like, one guy outside just blew his brains out. You're not seeing that type of craziness on the Russian side. And so who's really desperate? So let's go to the next one. And this one seems to give a more balanced view of things, but let's see. Troops' death and injuries in the Ukraine war near 500,000, U.S. officials say. Ukraine and Russia have lost a staggering number of troops as Kiev's counteroffensive drags on. A lack of rapid medical care has added to toll. So this one gives a more balanced view. Oh, that's just tragic. This one gives a more balanced view and says that they're both suffering great losses. And so right here it says U.S. officials said Ukraine had suffered close to 70,000 killed and 100,000 to 120,000 injured. The total number of Ukrainian and Russian troops killed or wounded since the war in Ukraine began 18 months ago is nearing 500,000, U.S. officials said. A staggering toll as Russia assaults its next door neighbor and tries to seize more territory. The officials cautioned that casualty figures remain difficult to estimate because Moscow is believed to routinely undercount its war dead and injured, and Kiev does not disclose official figures. But they said the slaughter intensified this year in eastern Ukraine and has continued at a steady clip as a nearly 3-month-old counteroffensive drags on. Russia's military casualties, the officials said, are approaching 300,000. The number includes as many as 120,000 deaths and 170,000 to 180,000 injured troops. The Russian numbers dwarf the Ukrainian figures, which the officials put at close to 70,000 killed and 100,000 to 120,000 wounded. But Russia's outnumbered Ukrainians on the battlefield almost 3-1, and Russia has a larger population from which to replenish its ranks. Ukraine has around 500,000 troops, including active duty, reserve, and paramilitary troops, according to analysts. By contrast, Russia has almost triple that number with 1,330,000 active duty, reserve, and paramilitary troops, most of the latter from the Wagner Group. The Biden administration's last public estimate of casualties came in November when General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that more than 100,000 troops on each side have been killed or wounded since the war began in February 2022. At the time, officials said privately that the numbers were close to 120,000 killed and wounded. So basically, we're never going to get an accurate number of what the death toll is because everybody has a vested interest in not telling the truth. We have a vested interest in not telling the truth because we want to continue to send them aid regardless of what the American people want. So, of course, we're not going to make it look like it's a lost cause. the Ukraine, they're not going to let the official numbers be known, especially if they're losing, because that's going to lower morale and again affect their ability to convince everyone else to give them aid in a losing effort. And Russia, even though I feel like they're probably winning this war, they also have a vested interest in not letting the truth be known, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in Russia who aren't really excited about going to war either. So that's it as far as like the whole death toll thing, and we didn't really get much out of that. But this is something more serious here coming up next. So the headline here says, Ukraine says officials stole 40 million meant for ammunition. And so I'm the type of person, when I hear crazy sounding conspiracy theories or, you know, people making these accusations about stuff like this, I always take a step back and I consider it, but I don't just believe everything that I hear. But it seems like more and more the crazy shit that I hear ends up being true in the end. And so one of the early conspiracies that I heard about the aid that the Ukraine was receiving is that the money is being stolen and embezzled and is being split up between different groups around the world, in the Ukraine, in America, in NATO, whatever the case may be, and that they're basically taking money meant for aid and pocketing it for themselves. And this article basically confirms it to a certain extent. Let's get into it. And so, hold up. There we go. So it says Kiev, Ukrainian officials stole about 40 million meant for the purchase of ammunition for the military. The country's internal security service said Saturday, confirming a mass procurement fraud as Kiev seeks to assure international backers that it is cracking down on corruption. So one of the reasons why people are against sending the money to Ukraine is because, like I said, there's this conspiracy that the money is being stolen and not being used for the right purpose. But look at this. Though it was state money, not foreign aid, that was embezzled, the security service of Ukraine said in a statement, the scheme is likely to resonate in both Washington and Brussels, where European Union membership and continued financial and military assistance hang in the balance. Bullshit. See, I hate it when they do this. And you know how this is bullshit? So it said, look at what they says. Though it was state money, not foreign aid money, it doesn't matter. And this is what I'm saying, right? Let me just use this as an example. Let's say I'm in a crisis. Let's say that I have cancer and my treatment is gonna cost $100,000, right? And then I tell you guys, look, I need $100,000, but I already got 50,000. So I do a GoFundMe for $50,000, right? This is all supposed to be for my cancer treatment. And I get that $50,000. But instead of using all the money that I have, my money and the money donated, I take my $50,000 and use it to buy a car. Now, even though I didn't use the money that was sent to me, I still was able to recognize and say, I'm getting all this money coming in. I can take the money I already have and use it for nefarious purposes, and then take the money coming in and then use that for what I actually need it for. It's kind of similar to what happened with, I think, Iran, when they were talking about the money that was being unfrozen and how that could have been used to supply the attacks on Israel. And a lot of people were saying, well, you know, even though the money was being unfrozen, there's no way they could have used it because they didn't have it yet, but they know it's coming in. You know the money is coming in, so whatever money you already got, you feel safer stealing or using it for what you need to. I don't want people to see this and think that it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter because whether it's state money or the foreign aid, you know the foreign aid is coming in. That's the point. And so it's like, well, the money is coming in so we can replace what we stole. Duh. That's why you gotta be careful how you analyze these situations, bro, because they be really trying to finesse us. So some detractors have pointed to Ukraine's history with corruption as reason to stop providing money to the country nearly 2 years into its war with Russia. Ukrainian officials insist that they are being hyper-vigilant and cracking down hard on graft. The SBU said its investigation implicated current and former high-ranking defense ministry officials and managers of an arms supplier, Lviv Arsenal, who were supposed to use the money to purchase 100,000 mortar shells for the military. Money was paid in advance to Lviv Arsenal in August 2022, but the shells were never supplied. Oh my God. U.S. war plans for Ukraine don't foresee retaking lost territory. After receiving the funds, the company's management transferred part of the money to the balance sheet of a foreign commercial structure that was supposed to deliver the ordered ammunition to Ukraine, the statement said. However, it did not send a single artillery shell to our country and took the received funds into the shadows, shadow government, transferring them to the accounts of another affiliated structure in the Balkans. Well, where is that? Who is that? The stolen funds have been seized, the SBU said, adding that the question of their return to the budget of Ukraine is being resolved. How do I know? And how do I know there isn't more money being stolen? The fraud took place under former defense minister Alexei Reznikov, who was ousted last year amid several high-profile allegations of corruption in the ministry, particularly the purchase of food and jackets for the military at inflated prices. Reznikov, who wasn't personally implicated in any malfeasance, declined to comment. Of course he would. And so right there, you have some sketchy shit going on as far as the handling of the aid being sent to the Ukraine. What do we know? What do I know? What do you know? What does the average American citizen really know? I feel like we are being deceived in so many different ways. And that's why we really have to be on top of like these facts. But really, you don't even have to, because quite frankly, I think we're fucked. I think the best you can do as an American citizen is just look out for yourself and your family the best that you can. And just try to avoid going along with as much government bullshit as you possibly can. But that's beside the point. Next, we are going to actually look at and analyze the Coach Red Pill video. So stay tuned. Okay, so we are back. And this is the second half of the main topic where we actually discuss Coach Red Pill or Gonzalo Lira. So I want to talk a little bit about what I know of him. So I was actually a pretty consistent viewer of his a few years back. Now he is considered to be, now he's obviously called Coach Red Pill because he was known for making Red Pill content, which is typically content about the new age ideas about how men should engage with and deal with women, but also the world at large, finances, fitness, money making, and things like that, fashion. But he mostly talked about relationships between men and women and dating, how to navigate that treacherous world. I would consider Coach Red Pill to be second generation Red Pill. Not necessarily one of the OGs or the first guys, like the early guys. He came in during a time where a lot of people sort of pegged him as being a grifter, or somebody just sort of attaching themselves to the movement to make an easy buck. You see a niche that you can fit into and you just try to do what other people are doing. But yeah, like I think now, because I think even now he's kind of like somewhat forgotten. Because we're in really the third generation of the Red Pill. Kevin Samuels, Fresh and Fit, Satan Center, things like that. Like we've evolved, so to speak, and he was more second generation. That sort of came after the first wave of Red Pill, Manosphere, and MGTOW guys. And based on the content that I've watched of his, I thought he put out pretty good content. I think he leaned definitely more towards like the safe side of things as far as how he expressed his views. And I think that's why some people saw him as being a grifter. Because he wasn't nearly as edgy as some of the other guys, some of the newer guys within the Red Pill community. To me, even he came across as being kind of a normie, but he had pretty solid ideas and whatnot. Overall, I found him to be a likable content creator, and he put good effort into his videos. But during this whole war in Ukraine, we saw a completely different side of him. And what I mean is, now it depends on how you look at it. Some people say he was incredibly stupid. Some people say he was incredibly brave and insightful. Maybe it's a combination of two. You know, it's a thin line there. But the way he switched gears and sort of became this insider on the war in the Ukraine, and also the takes that he made in his videos while he was in the Ukraine and some of the things that he predicted, really just showed how aware he was of what was really going on. Now I kind of scoff at the idea that people consider him to be a grifter, because I think in a way he proved himself to be someone who really stood on thinking outside the box and not falling for what was considered to be politically correct stance to have on the war. And he expressed it in the biggest way possible. Like, he really was in harm's way when he was talking about these things. It's easy to talk about relationships between men and women and whatnot, but to be in the Ukraine and to say things that would make you out to be a Russian sympathizer, that's somebody who's really standing on the truth 100%. And so I'm just saying, for that, I would give him a lot of credit, because a lot of people, again, called him a grifter and this and that. And he took the red pill to like the highest, most dangerous level and even talked that shit in a war zone. So, for that, I applaud him. But like I said, it's believed at this point that he died while being detained in the Ukraine. They wouldn't allow him to leave. I don't exactly know why, since he's a U.S. citizen. But let's look at this article here. So it says, Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk have rallied behind an American red pill dating coach turned Russian propagandist detained in Ukraine. So what I gotta say is, like, what makes him a Russian propagandist? Like, if he's in the Ukraine talking positively about the Ukraine, does that make him a Ukrainian propagandist? It seems like you're a propagandist whenever you're speaking well of the side that whoever is talking against you or whoever doesn't like you. It seems like that's when you're a propagandist. If I don't like you and you're talking well of the side I don't like, then yeah, you're a propagandist. But even just based off that, and we're gonna watch the video together. Fair use, by the way. But we're gonna watch the video together, and even in the video, it doesn't seem like he's a Russian sympathizer. It seems like he's just telling the damn truth. But anyway, key points here: Gonzalo Lira, a U.S. citizen and red pill YouTuber, was arrested in Ukraine in May. This week, Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk rallied behind him, claiming his detention is unjust. The Ukrainian government says Lira spread pro-Russian propaganda and justified the invasion. So let's get into it. A former red pill dating coach turned Russian propagandist has been detained in Ukraine since May, and now Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk have taken up his cause. Ukraine's security service and SBU arrested the American YouTuber Gonzalo Lira on May 1st at his home in Kharkov Ukraine on charges of spreading pro-Russian propaganda. Lira, who has U.S. and I think that's Chilean citizenship, spent several years dabbling in various creative fields, including a brief stint writing about economics for Business Insider, before gaining minor fame on social media as an online dating coach known as Coach Red Pill. His online moniker references a metaphor from The Matrix in which the protagonist is given a choice between learning potentially unpleasant truths, taking the red pill, and returning to mundane life, taking the blue pill. The manosphere, an online subculture promoting misogyny and opposing feminism, has co-opted the term red pill. And so right there you have it pretty much. The protagonist is given a choice between learning potentially unpleasant truths, taking the red pill, Coach Red Pill. And when you watch what he says in the video, that's really all it is. He's telling the unpleasant truth about the situation. And I think he even mentions how it's not as simple as just the purely good guys versus the absolutely evil side. It's rarely that simple. But when you express that and when you say that, you know, some people, they take issue with it. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Lira, who had lived in Ukraine for several years after marrying a Ukrainian woman, shifted to commenting on the war on YouTube, Telegram, and Twitter. And see, this is why some people consider him to be a grifter. You know, you're Mr. Red Pill. You're Mr. Red Pill manosphere guy, but you're getting married. I feel like getting married is like that's one of the easiest ways to not have people respect you within the red pill. That's like rule number one that you don't do. That's considered to be the most stupidest thing you could do. But he got married in the Ukraine. Maybe the laws aren't exactly the same. Maybe he did that intentionally because he knew something that I don't. But I digress. He often peddled Kremlin propaganda, denying war crimes and describing the invasion of Ukraine as one of the most brilliant invasions in military history. He also attacked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky extensively, calling him the cokehead of Kiev and calling his government a neo-Nazi regime. So, one thing I will say about that neo-Nazi regime comment, because I think Vladimir Putin talked about Nazis in the Ukraine as well. And he talked about how there was a Nazi war criminal or something, or just some guy who was a confirmed Nazi who was celebrated and applauded in, I think, the Canadian Parliament or something like that. And I think it was when Zelensky was over there in Canada. That's a cool name, Canada, in Canada. But I'm not sure about that last part. But let's keep going. Political prisoner or Russian propagandist. The former Fox News host Carlson posted a video on X on Saturday, which has nearly 40 million views at the time of writing, that framed Lira as a political prisoner, punished simply for exercising his free speech and criticizing Zelensky. Carlson also repeated an unverified claim by Lira that he had been tortured in prison in Ukraine and accused the U.S. State Department of being uninterested in his fate. The State Department did not respond to a request for comment from BI. Carlson himself has generated controversy for promoting Kremlin propaganda and being highly critical of U.S. support for Ukraine. A Ukrainian government department that combats disinformation, Spravdy, said in a statement Monday that Lira was not jailed for criticizing Zelensky, but for justifying Russian aggression against Ukraine, a crime Article 4362 of country's criminal code, and for violating the terms of his bail. According to Spravdy, Lira justified the invasion by claiming a neo-Nazi regime ran Ukraine, a bogus claim that Russian President Vladimir Putin has long touted, and he's denied the extent of Russian attacks on civilians, including the massacre in Bucha. Okay, so Lira also filmed videos of Ukrainian soldiers in which he insulted them and tried to show their faces before publishing the videos on social media. Spravdy said, this guy. Spravdy also said Lira attempted to dox U.S. journalists covering the war by publishing their addresses online and putting their safety at risk. Though Lira was arrested 7 months ago, he has only now started to gain support in the U.S. media, possibly because his trial is starting this month, with hearings scheduled for last Monday and December 21st, according to Spravdi. He faces a possible prison sentence of 5 to 8 years, according to the Daily Beast. Carlson was not the only high-profile figure to rally behind Lira this week. Musk also weighed in, describing Lira's detention as not okay. I swear, not Biden, but Musk is such a robot. It's not okay. I don't like it. I remember, just real quick, Alex Jones is promoting his Team Humanity shirt, and then he asks Elon Musk if he likes the idea in the little commercial for it. And you can hear Elon Musk say, yeah, Team Humanity, fine. He's a robot. Beep boop. And Musk criticized the community notes feature on X, the platform he owns that allows readers to add context to potentially misleading posts. He claimed without providing evidence that the notes had been gamed by state actors after they added information about the reasons for Lira's arrest. Though Musk has long claimed his political views are neither right nor left, he has increasingly championed right-wing causes and rhetoric. Musk previously courted controversy after he suggested how to end the war while appearing to parrot Kremlin talking points and has mocked Ukraine's request for aid. Okay. So that's enough of that. Let's get to the actual video. Okay, so here we are. We are going to watch the Coach Red Pill video, the first video he put out once the war in Ukraine jumped off. And we're going to analyze his assessment of the war and see where he was right and where he was wrong.
So today is... and it's the third day of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Now, people in the United States do not seem to understand what is going on insofar as Russia's invasion is concerned, because they keep saying that Russia is failing, which is the weirdest comment. Russia is failing because Russia hasn't taken out the infrastructure of Ukraine, hasn't hit the electrical grid, hasn't destroyed the cell phone towers or the water supply or something like that. It's just remarkable. They keep insisting that the Russians seem to advance and then retreat whenever they meet any resistance.
And so right there, you already have an important point that he makes, and which is how the narrative is constructed in such a way to make Russia look bad, to make it look as if the Ukrainians have a chance of winning this war. And it was like that from the very beginning. He said, this was day 3 of the invasion? And that's exactly, it's still like that to this day, where, it's hard to tell exactly what's true and what's false, because you can tell that every side has an interest in painting the narrative a certain way. Even Russia has that, has that same incentive. But yeah, definitely something that he caught on to early. And one thing I want to say real quick, because I just thought about it, is that, he took his American mentality to the wrong place. I got to say that. Because, when you think of a place like Russia, and I didn't know much about the Ukraine before this happened, but I would assume that there probably isn't vast differences in how they think as a people. Again, just guessing, I don't know. If I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. But one thing about Russia is kind of seen as being this, like a country. You don't think of like free speech when you think of Russia. I would imagine you can't talk shit about Vladimir Putin the way you could talk shit about Biden or Donald Trump in America. And so it's probably the same in the Ukraine to a certain extent. And so to be an American and to take this attitude over there, while I get it, because maybe you don't know better, but still, I can see why he was like perceived as being a problem, Because you don't see a lot of that even to this day. You don't see a lot of people within the Ukraine coming out, getting on the internet, talking poorly about the war. At least if they are, they're not getting any spotlight.
Mm-hmm. It's a failure of imagination on the part of so many American commentators that they do not seem to understand what Russia is really doing with this invasion. Because you see, the American mode of war is to go to a country and destroy everything. Destroy the electrical grid, cell towers, the water supply system, everything. Just destroy the whole thing and then roll in. That's not fighting a war. That's just mopping up the total annihilation of a country. And the United States has done this repeatedly in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, or they semi-tried to do it in Syria. I mean, it's really kind of like a despicable way of making war, right? But what are the Russians doing? Well, see, the Russians, they don't want to destroy Ukraine. No, they don't want to destroy it at all. What they want to do is they want to capture it intact, see? And they don't want to hurt the civilians. Why would they? From their point of view, if they harm civilians, they just create enemies. And so they want to capture Ukraine, change the political leadership of Ukraine, and install a political leadership that is sympathetic to Russia's security needs.
And see, this is so much in line with everything that we're learning now. When you look at the Vladimir Putin interview, it's hard to not be able to see how it all sort of lines up with what he's saying now. And again, he's saying this before the Putin interview, and this is back when it all started. You know, we all have the advantage of having these new updates, but he was already privy to what was going on. And when you look at what Vladimir Putin is talking about, what was his biggest issue with Ukraine? It wasn't like, oh, I hate how I got to kill all the Ukrainians. It was obviously in connection with the Ukraine wanting to be a sovereign state and aligning itself with NATO and the West. And even though we're not exactly at war with each other, we're not exactly friendly enough to where they would feel comfortable allowing the Ukraine, their next door neighbor, to join NATO. And just like he said out his own mouth, it's a security issue. And Putin wants to put in a government that, I mean, quite frankly, a puppet government that he won't have to worry about aligning itself with the West and NATO. If that's the goal, then yeah, you don't have to destroy everything. If they just simply surrendered or turned in Zelensky's head, whatever they wanted, they thought would be right, then that would have been it. You know, they could have avoided, and I'm not saying whether or not they should have or not. It's up to them as a people whether or not they choose to fight. But the fact is, had they surrendered and just handed Zelensky over on a silver platter and then let Putin put in a government of his choosing, then this would have been over in no time.
And is going to be a long-term ally.
Yeah, listen to what he said, long-term ally, because essentially Ukraine was trying to align itself with NATO and America, which is not a Russian ally. So now you're an enemy, but you're also our neighbor. We can't allow that.
But they don't want to alienate the Ukrainian population. Because if they alienate the Ukrainian population, well, the Ukrainian population will eventually overthrow this puppet regime. And the Russians want to install a puppet regime. Let's not pretend otherwise. But they want to install a puppet regime whereby the Ukrainian citizens are more or less indifferent to it.
And see, this is what I'm saying. Like when people say, oh, he's spreading Russian propaganda. If you're a propagandist, you're not going to call the new government that they want to install a puppet government. If I'm creating propaganda for America, I'm not going to say, well, we just want to put a puppet government. We just want to roll in and put in this new puppet government and then roll out, but control things from the shadows. You wouldn't say something like that if you were actually a propagandist, if you were trying to be a sympathizer for somebody. That's just stating the facts. And I think that's how you can see that this is a man who just laying out the objective reality of the situation. I guarantee you, he don't give a fuck about Russia. He don't give a fuck about Putin. If he did, why would he be into Ukraine as opposed to Russia? He could have easily went to Russia instead.
They don't want to install the lives of Ukrainians so miserable. So that's why they don't want to destroy Ukraine or harm the Ukrainian populace. They want to capture Ukraine intact, change the political leadership, and then let it go. Of course, because they don't want to manage Ukraine. They don't want it to be a burden on them. They don't want that long term. And so what are they doing? They are rapidly invading the whole country, and everybody concedes that they're moving very, very quickly. But they're not hitting any civilian infrastructure. They're only hitting military targets. And they are relentless in hitting the military targets, but always with a certain degree of caution. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But they're hitting military targets. They are avoiding civilian populations and civilian infrastructure. And when they go to a city or a destination, when they encounter any resistance from the Ukrainian army, any serious resistance, they stop and pull back. Because what are they doing? They are encircling. That's their whole strategy. And it's very simple. And if you look at a map,
and that's funny because if you look at what's happening in Avdiivka, I know I'm saying that wrong. That's exactly what they're doing. You can look at it on the map. They are surrounding that. I think it's a city. They're surrounding that city slowly over time until it's going to be completely engulfed. And so I guess that's the strategy that they're using throughout the entire country from the very beginning. So again, he's spot on with their strategy and their tactics as far as how they're trying to take the Ukraine over.
You'd realize it. What the Russians are doing is that whenever they go to a major city like Kiev, like Kharkov, and soon enough they're going to be in Dnipro, when they get to those cities, they go up to those cities and they meet some resistance and then they pull back. And they allow their forces to start to surround it. And that's the strategy they're employing in Kiev. That's the strategy that they're employing in Kharkov. They are encircling these cities. And once they've completely encircled them, what will they do? They'll wait. That's what they'll do. See, if you surround a city, all you have to do is just wait around. Eventually it'll fall, of course. And so the Russians are systematically surrounding all of the major cities. And whenever they come across a smaller town or village, they just advance and cover it and capture it and move on and continue with their advance. Whenever they meet any kind of serious resistance, they stop, pull back, and then encircle. One of the things that they want to capture intact, and people don't seem to realize this, but it's very obvious if you think about it, they are trying to capture the Ukrainian army. That's not why there hasn't been any major battles with, hundreds or thousands of casualties. It's been light skirmishes.
And see, right here, this is where, over time, his prediction here went way wrong. And I think that this could be... Oh, hold up. How did my alarm go off and I deleted the alarm app? But obviously, when you look at the war now, the fighting has intensified a lot to where we're seeing death tolls up into the hundreds of thousands. Now, granted, this was early. This was the first 3 days of the war. So, how much bloodshed could there been in such a short amount of time? But I think at this point, the idea of capturing the Ukrainian army, now whether or not that was true, who knows? But it's out the window now because I don't think Putin really realized how hard they would fight back. maybe he didn't realize how heavily they would implement their conscription policies to draft soldiers. And maybe he didn't realize how much aid they would get from other countries that would allow them to prolong the war. I did see this weird Russian commercial or propaganda, if you will, that was basically showing a Ukrainian trying to dodge the draft, and he ends up getting captured and forced to fight. And then they show two possibilities. They show him getting killed trying to fight back, and they show him being captured waving the white flag. So from what I heard, this is Russian propaganda, or them trying to put out the word to the Ukrainians that if you surrender, we won't kill you. We will accept you into our country, because we know that they're forcing you to fight against your will. And so that's why on this point, I would say that it's definitely escalated far beyond what Coach Red Pill is saying here about them not wanting to, or the fighting not escalating to a certain point. Because I think the Ukrainians fought back so hard that it pretty much just forced a situation like this. But at the same time, you can see, if we are to believe, again, this advert put out by Putin about being willing to accept any Ukrainian soldiers who put up a white flag, then that at least shows some degree of like, look, we don't want to just slaughter you guys. As long as you're not a problem for us, you surrender, we're not going to fuck with you. How true that is, I don't know.
For all intents and purposes, the Russian army is typically
hold up.
Ukraine. Insofar as air power is concerned, the Russians in the first 3 hours wiped the Ukrainian skies of everything. The Russians own the Ukrainian skies. Any plane flying is Russian. But insofar as their army is concerned, this isn't World War II. This isn't a World War II where the Russian armies were kissing cousins of the Mongol hordes. You know what I'm saying? No, this is the modern Russian army that has the goal of capturing intact Ukraine and the Ukrainian army. Because the Russians realize that once they have captured Ukraine and changed the political leadership, they will need an army to protect and look after the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian land. They don't want to destroy the Ukrainian army. They could do that if they wanted to. They would have done that already. They own the skies over Ukraine.
And so I fact checked that to see if they really did have air superiority to that extent over the Ukraine. And from one article that I read, it seems to be true. I found an article that was basically explaining, now this is later in the war, mind you, but it was explaining like, yes, Russia has air superiority, but that's about to change. So apparently, I don't know where they're going to get the aid from. I know there are different countries that are helping the Ukraine, but apparently the article was talking about how the Ukraine is sort of beefing up its air resistance or its air capabilities as far as the war. But again, this was a later article, and it's also admitting that, yes, they are inferior in terms of air combat. And so you got to think, if Russia did have such an extreme level of air superiority, then that does kind of confirm that they never wanted to just roll in and destroy everything. Because if you have the clear air superiority and you don't give a fuck about what you destroy, then you're going to be dropping bombs everywhere. Just like what he was talking about earlier about how the United States does war, how we just drop bombs, we destroy as much as we can without putting ourselves in much danger. Then we roll in and we clean up what's left. If Russia really wanted to just annihilate the Ukraine, then more than likely that would have been the strategy they would have implemented if they did have that much air superiority.
Their goal is to capture the Ukrainian army with as little casualties as possible to the Ukrainian army. And that's why whenever they come up against serious Ukrainian resistance, they keep consistently pulling back. And in the West, this is interpreted as the Russians are weak, which is so weird. It's like the Russians are so weak, they're not advancing as fast. I mean, well, that is a separate issue that I'm going to get to in just a moment. But the Russians are so weak because they're not obliterating the Ukrainian army. Because that's what the Americans do. They obliterate anything that crosses their path. Friend or foe, they don't really care. But the Russians do care. That's why they're not obliterating the Ukrainian army when they could. A friend of mine, Alex Christoforou, and the Duran, great show, he pointed out something that I'd never considered, which is very obvious. He pointed out the fact that, you see, the current Ukrainian leadership in the military, the generals in Ukraine, they went to military academies with the generals of the Russian armies. They're drinking buddies since when they were back in like 18-year-old, 19-year-old plebes. They know each other. They don't want to kill each other. Of course not. I mean, you've got some buddy when you were drinking out when you were 18, right? Do you want to kill him? No, you could be on opposing sides of whatever contest, but you don't want to hurt him.
And so this is just another example of the relationship between Russia and the Ukraine. And he's just explaining how commanders or high-level military personnel in the Ukraine and Russia probably know each other based on just the, how close Ukraine and Russia are in proximity with one another, and how people would tend to, sort of hop back and forth between the two countries. So let's continue.
Of course not. You'll be pissed.
Whoop.
The Russian army doesn't want to destroy the Ukrainian army. They could have done it already in these 3 days of combat. Once the Russians owned the skies over Ukraine, they could have done whatever they wanted with the Ukrainian army. They could have annihilated it, just blown it to smithereens, and blown away the entire population of Ukraine if they wanted to. They could cause a major, major humanitarian crisis if they wanted to, and they obviously don't. How do I know this? Because they haven't done it. They have had the opportunity for 3 days to do it, and they haven't done it. I'm doing this stupid video from a hotel room in downtown Kiev, and I'm going to upload it to the internet. Do you think I'd be able to do it if the Russians were really serious about conquering Ukraine? They want to capture it. Understand that. And understand that you in the West, you are being goaded into thinking that Putin and the Russians are like evil Antichrist. You don't understand why the Russians are invading. And your political leadership, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, all these people, they don't want you to understand. Of course not. They want you to just demonize, just to take the easy way out. They want you to imagine that this is a Marvel comic book movie and that, there are white hats and black hats, good guys and bad guys. Yeah, we got to kill the bad guys because we're the good guys. Yeah.
And oh God, that's perfect. Perfect explanation of one of the biggest problems that we have. And I think really not just us in America, but I think that's the tendency that most countries tend to have. When you have an elite few that dictate whether or not we go to war, how do you convince the millions and the masses to go along with it? How do you convince people to sign up and risk their life for a cause? You have to put it in their mind that we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And it's so funny, like, for them to sit here and call this guy a propagandist, right? When the real propaganda is this whole Marvel comic, Star Wars, good versus evil narrative that countries and governments and leaders try to sell their people so they will give up their lives and risk so much for them. That's the real propaganda, because it's never that simple. And when I zoomed out and really analyzed the situation and saw our side of it and Putin's side of it and the Ukrainian side of it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, well, now it makes more sense. I can see why Putin did what he did. I wish it didn't come to this, But I think the reality is that the first move, well, not even the first, but the real trigger to all this was the Ukraine trying to align itself with the West to the degree that made Russia feel uncomfortable with its own security. And then you got to ask yourself, is that alliance worth the death toll that we're looking at now on both sides? Is it worth the taxpayers' money from America and these other countries being spent on this war? And, I think that the answer to me is obviously no.
It's so naive. Russians don't want to harm Ukraine. They would have destroyed Ukraine if they wanted to. But they don't. They want to capture it in one piece. Now, you can say that Russia's motivations are this, that, the other. It doesn't matter. You have to look at the practical reality that is taking place now. What really bothers me, and perhaps this isn't a wise thing for me to say while I'm still in Ukraine under the Zelensky regime.
Oh, man, that's an understatement.
What really bothers me is that the Zelensky regime has no trouble causing a humanitarian crisis. In fact, they welcome a humanitarian crisis. They would love to see dead Ukrainians. And I know this for a fact. And do you know how I know this for a fact? Because the Zelensky government has been handing out AK-47s willy-nilly to the civilian population. As I understand it, they've already handed out 10,000 AK-47s and munitions to match. Now, you see, if you've never had any kind of military experience, you, with a weapon like that, you can become extremely dangerous to all the people around you and to yourself. It takes training to operate a firearm. You have to know what you're doing. It's not a casual thing, okay? It's not like in the movies. It's very, very dangerous. And you can harm yourself before you harm anybody else. And the harm you can cause to others is, it's incalculable and you can't take it back. Now, the Zelensky regime is handing out these weapons, teaching people how to use Molotov cocktails, how to make Molotov cocktails and use them themselves. They want to foment the people to fight the war against the Russians. And the thing is, the Russians have professional soldiers. Now, these professional soldiers, they carry a weapon, they know what to do with the weapon. And if they see somebody armed, be it a man in a uniform or just a civilian with an AK-47, well, they're going to shoot him, okay? And so that civilian will be dead, and that will present a great photo op, now won't it? So that Zelensky can wrangle some European country or the Americans or whomever to come in and get involved in this war.
Which we are doing right now. Now, we don't have boots on the ground outside of, I think, some military advisors. But as far as the money and weaponry being sent over there, yeah, we are a little bit more than involved at this point.
And potentially escalate the situation to levels that are unimaginable. The Zelensky regime is doing something frankly evil, because it is evil to encourage civilians to do something that incredibly dangerous and irresponsible. The Zelensky regime has also put heavy weaponry in civilian population centers. Now, these heavy weapons, howitzers and whatnot, they're dangerous. And so the Russian army has every right and obligation to destroy such heavy weapons. But of course, when trying to destroy such weapons, it's inevitable that you're not going to quite hit the weapons when you try to aim for them. You're going to hit around the weapons. And therefore, if these weapons are in the middle of apartment complexes, you're going to have Russians shelling apartment complexes, killing innocent civilians. The Zelensky regime is putting these weapons in the middle of populated areas precisely because they want to have this happen. And I'll tell you something else that the Zelensky regime is doing. They are forcibly conscripting men between the ages of 18 and 60. They are not allowing them to leave the country, and if they try to leave the country, they are arrested and forcibly conscripted. That is, forcibly put into the Ukrainian army.
And we all know that's true. There are countless videos that have come out where you see young guys. I saw one where the guy was fighting back. I think he body slammed the guy trying to kidnap him, and then he ran away. But yeah, you see, there are some fucked up videos where you see these guys being forced into cars and driven away. Like I said earlier, there was the one video where the whole village of people attacked the press gang or the people trying to forcibly conscript them, and you know, that's why I have to agree. I have to agree with Coach Redfield here, because at the end of the day, what are you doing? You're forcing people to fight in a war, to fight and die in a war that cannot be won. You know, you're basically using these young, let's call it what it is. You're using these young men as a meat shield so that you can continue the war for your own personal reasons while you get all this money, and a lot of this money, which is now confirmed to have been stolen and not used for the proper purposes. You know, what do we really know about this man Zelensky? What do we know about his character? And you know, it's so easy to try to stand up and look a certain way for for photos and magazines and shit like that. But you know, what's the reality of this person and his government? And me personally, I'm against conscription. I'm against the draft. Now I can understand the desire to want to fight for your country and how you would feel about the other men around you not wanting to fight when you're willing to fight. But I think what we have to ask ourselves as men is, you know, what happens when the people above us, when the government, when the people in charge get us involved in a war that is not just? What happens when they get us involved in a war that could have been easily avoided? You know, is conscription, is the draft right then? You know, and I always think back to Muhammad Ali and how he resisted the draft in Vietnam, a war which now we all see, or most of us see, as being unjust and a war that we should have never got involved in. You know, Muhammad Ali, he resisted that and he never went to that war. You know, and we look at him as a hero for that, because he stood up pretty much to the entire government and was willing to lose his life if it came to that, just to not have to fight in that war. And so, you know, based on my own value system, that's how I see it too. When you see these guys being forcefully conscripted, you know, I hate it. It makes me sick to my stomach. And it's the fact that our government, and again, this is what I'm saying, like they sit here and they say, oh, this guy, oh, he's spreading the propaganda. He's wrong. And what's wrong with him? When have you ever heard anybody in our country, any government official, Biden and his administration, when have you heard them speak once about the conscription policies in the Ukraine? When have you heard them talk any at all about these videos that have come out about young men being kidnapped and forced to fight against their will? What has been said at all from our government about these mentally handicapped retards being put on the front line to fight in this war? I haven't heard a peep. So again, who's the one spreading the propaganda? Is it Coach Red Pill? Is it Putin? Is it America? Is it all of us? What I hear from Coach Red Pill is the objective facts of what's going on. And when I look at our government, I don't see that. I see a narrative. I don't see a laying out of all the facts, because when you lay out all the facts, that's when people might not come to the conclusion and develop the opinion that you need them to in order to support you. Let's continue.
Now, what has happened in the ages of 18 and 60 is running away from the cities. That's why there are so many refugees. It's not that they're seriously thinking that the Russians are going to shell and destroy their apartments or their homes or whatnot. They're afraid of getting arrested and forcibly conscripted. The women and the young children and old men are having to hide these men who are between the ages of 18 and 60. And by the way, this isn't something that I heard. People that I know personally, people that I do business with, I know them. I've gone drinking with them, eating with them, doing deals with them. They've had to leave Kiev for fear of being forcibly pressed into the Ukrainian army.
The press gang.
Middle-aged men, farts like me, who are out of shape, we're real good at some business deal, but crappy at carrying a backpack and a weapon, with no experience whatsoever in such activity. And the Ukrainian government, the Zelensky regime, is doing this.
I love that word, regime.
And why do you think they're doing it? Well, first of all, you don't forcibly conscript men into your army if you think that you're winning. Now, do you? Of course not. Number one.
And you notice one thing about a lot of the recent wars that we've had in America, or our involvements in wars in the Middle East and whatnot, we haven't had a draft since Vietnam. We haven't had a draft since then. I think the main reason why we had a draft in Vietnam is because, quite frankly, they failed to build up the amount of desire and motivation for men to go to war like they did in, the previous world wars, like World War II. Like, I'm sure in World War II, men were probably ready to sign up. I think it was a completely different environment, and I think the reason why, when we think of World War II, like, you really think about it, we don't think of the draft in those wars. We always think of the draft when it comes to Vietnam. Every war before that might have had a draft, we don't think about it. We always think about the Vietnam draft because it was the war that we really didn't want to fight. And when you look at this war and when you look at all the videos coming out of people running away and trying to get away from these press gangs and these military people trying to force them into the army, it shows you that a lot of these guys do not want to fight.
Number two, you scare all the men and you create, all on your own, a whole class of refugees, of people fleeing the cities. They're not afraid of the Russians. They're afraid of the Ukrainian regime that is trying to press them into service. That's what's going on. And so you see all the video images of people fleeing the city, and you in the West, you in the United States and Western Europe think, oh, they're afraid of the Russians.
That was and you know what? That was exactly what I thought. And I'm sure, to be fair, there were probably plenty of people who were like, oh no, the Russians. Let's not kid ourselves here. I'm sure there were people like, oh, they're going to come, they're going to rape us and all that. Come on. But at the same time, more than likely, there's a lot of truth to what he's saying here. That a lot of that chaos, a lot of that running away was men being like, I'm not fighting. I'm not fighting in this war. Hell no.
No, they're afraid of the Zelensky. But I have to say that the issue of handing out weapons to civilians who don't know how to handle them, that is the thing I find most despicable. Because they are willing to have these poor civilians who know nothing of weaponry become martyrs. Because the Russian soldiers who see some civilian with a gun, well, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to shoot him. And that innocent civilian who doesn't even know how to hold the damn weapon is going to die needlessly for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And I find that despicable. I find that truly evil. Also, the Zelensky regime can get a nice photo op. That's what's going on. And if you want to say that the message I'm saying is pro-Russian or pro-Putin or I'm a Putin stooge or useful idiot or whatever, fine. I don't care. I mean, I don't really care your opinion, man. I don't give a fuck what you think about me. I'm telling you the truth. I'm here. I'm here in Kiev, in the downtown, waiting for the Russians to invade the damn place, huh? So I know what I'm talking about. None of this stuff is appearing in the mainstream media now, is it, huh? Because I'm not following the American or European mainstream media because I know it's just a pack of lies. But probably what I'm saying in this video, you haven't heard it. Well, now you're hearing it. and think a little bit, huh? I mean, in this channel, what have I always told you, stupid motherfuckers, huh? Think for yourself. Think. Look at the information that you have available and ask yourself why something is happening the way it's happening. It's not arbitrary. It's not by chance. People have thought through what they are doing. The Russians have certainly thought through what they're doing. The best that we can hope for is that the Zelensky regime fails in its attempt to wrangle in the Europeans and the Americans into this war, and the Zelensky regime collapses or flees or whatever, and Russia is able to take Ukraine in one piece without harming too many people. And that's the best that we can hope for. Or if not, the whole country will be destroyed. Millions of people will be displaced, hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions killed. And this is the exact same thing that happened in Iraq. Let's hope that we don't have a second Iraq. So today is...
Wow. So that was the video. That was the infamous Coach Red Pill video. I think that last part that he said about thinking for yourself, take the information and, think for yourself, come to your own conclusion. I think that's really always what he stood for. And I think that's what the Red Pill community stands for. The Manosphere stands for. It's just thinking outside the box and coming to your own conclusion about things and, being willing to, take a different path and not just buy into the mainstream narrative surrounding whatever it is that you're interested in, whether that's women, war, or the food you put into your body, finances, etc. Man, I love the way he closes out there. I really do. But when you look at the video as a whole, I think for the most part, he was definitely on point. I think the only thing that really ended up going to the wayside is the idea that Russia is trying to capture the Ukrainian army. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because I think one thing that is clear is that between the conscription, and I'm not sure, but there are videos that I've seen where apparently it was deserters or draft dodgers being like killed or something like that. Cause there are several wars where the army would practice the act of killing soldiers who didn't want to fight, soldiers who would retreat, surrender, or try to desert the front lines. They'll be killed by the soldiers behind them. But whatever the case may be, I think at the same time, there are definitely Ukrainians who they want to fight for their homeland. They feel like, look, I'm in the Ukraine. I'm a Ukrainian. They're the Russians. They're in Russia. They're not us. I don't want them. I don't like them. They're invading us. And I can understand that sentiment too. And so as far as that aspect, I think that's a lost cause. This war has just only gotten more and more uglier, maybe at some point, like he said, if the Zelensky government collapses, if that ever happens, I'm willing to bet that a lot of the fighting and the Ukrainians are probably going to stand down as well, because I think at this point, probably a lot of the fighting is probably being done against their will. I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be too hard to get people to put their arms down if Zelensky waved the white flag or if his government collapsed. But who knows? Maybe the Ukrainians are built different. But I think it's unfortunate because most evidence at this point points in the direction that Coach Red Pill is dead. Now, I'm not sure if he was murdered in a Ukrainian prison camp or something like that, from what I've heard, and remember, this is just rumor, was that he was very sick even during this time, that he had some sort of illness and his health was declining, and that, you know, being put in a Ukrainian prison obviously didn't help anything. But apparently that's what was going on, that he was sick at the time and that the conditions of his confinement accelerated the decline of his health, and that's what ultimately killed him. And his father went on a podcast to talk about him, and I've heard some people say that his father confirmed that he died. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched some of it. So again, I'm 90% sure that he's dead, which is very unfortunate because even though some people consider him to be a grifter, I think this was his magnum opus as far as red pill content is concerned. Because like I said earlier, you can say what you want, but this guy was essentially behind enemy lines telling what he believed to be the truth. And he did so without shame. He did so the best he could. And he did it right there in the face of the Zelensky government, which obviously took a great deal of courage from him. And I just think the way he lays it all out at the time that he did would not have been well received. Even I would have been skeptical. But now I think most of us can see just how on point his overall analysis was. And, you know, I think one of the most important things that I take away from this is just like he said, you know, we got to get out of this mindset of black and white, good versus evil scenarios and thinking that it's always that simple. Because I think this is a great example of how that just isn't the case. When you really look at everything and you connect all the dots, it's like you can see why it ended up like this, and you can see how it could have been avoided. But unfortunately, it is what it is, and all we can do is move forward. I just hope this war ends as quickly as possible, because who knows how this situation could be manipulated and taken to the next level. What if the Zelensky government and the Ukraine gets pushed to the absolute edge, and then our government starts sending troops over there or something like that? And I believe when this war started, Putin was like, if you guys intervene, we gonna turn up, you know, more or less. And even though we've already intervened in our own way, I think what he meant was that if it gets to the point where you guys are sending your troops, then it's on 100%. And you know that Russia is allied with North Korea, they're allied with China. You know, we're talking about some big dogs on the world stage that are not to be fooled around with. You know, and so, you know, I hate to say it, and I'm a neat in my mom's basement. So what can I really do? But it's one of those situations where I feel like, what can we do as people? It feels like we don't have any real control in our country anymore. It's obvious we don't want to send any more money. It's obvious that most people don't want to get involved in this shit, but here we are involved and sending money. And so it's like, what, how, like, how does our government and its structure really work for us at this point? And it's not even just this war, man. It's the immigration thing. It's the inflation. Like, there's so many things going on. And it's just like, even though it's obvious that we don't want to deal with it, we don't have any real control. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on this. Next, we're going to have the thread of the day, which is going to be Poe's reaction to the news that Coach Red Pill died. So stay tuned. Okay, so we are back and we're close to the final stretch of this episode. So we are going to read some of the comments that were left or made on poll when news of his apparent death became known. So let's get right to it. So the OP has a picture of Gonzalo Lira, and the OP says he represented civilization. And then this guy says, gotta respect Coach. He made some B+ life advice stuff back in 2018 or something. Then his channel died. Never heard of him till 2021. And he's in an invaded country. Now he's some sort of martyr. Crazy as fuck. I heard he was dying of a heart issue and had 2 years to live left. So maybe this was like a final act to do something or die a hero. Anyone cheering his death is a NATO fudge packer. Is that bad, YouTube? But here's a guy giving Gonzalo, some well-deserved credit for the courage or the stupidity to say what he did in the Ukraine. Some of these get pretty bad though. And so this guy says, I liked his advice, never liked him much. I remember he got into this one Spurgy Discord rant where he was talking about how he was winning the genetic race because he had a few baby mamas that didn't take him for child support or anything, and took grave offense to someone calling him a shitty dad. Sounded very black-like. And then this guy says he definitely was or I think they mean narcissistic, although that was part of what I liked about him. He was a pretty funny boomer involved in e-drama. It's like if your old schizo uncle browsed 4chan and somehow got big on YouTube. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of him. He was definitely old school. And you could tell that, and this is why people consider him to be a grifter, that he saw the red pill space and he saw that it was a lane that he could, make a name for himself in. And he just sort of inserted himself into it. And you got to give credit where credit is due, because he made a name for himself. At the end of the day, grifter or not, he came in and he built up a somewhat decent sized audience, and now has gone down in infamy due to his antics in the Ukraine. And so this guy says he values speaking and uncovering the truth above his own safety and survival. What he did doesn't make logical sense. Criticize tyrannical government while still within its borders. What did he think was going to happen? For the first year of Yuki War, most of the entire NWO brainwashed world were worshiping that Zell fudge packer. Criticizing him for that long was just a death wish. Even though the guy looks like a Pillsbury doughboy, it was basically suicide by anti-Semitism. Yes, criticizing Zell is anti-Semitic. Yeah, I think Zelensky happens to be Jewish, so but yeah, it was pretty ballsy of him to say all that while he was in the Ukraine. And remember, the Ukraine is not America. It's not, they're not like us. They don't have the same freedom of speech code like we do. And even within our own borders, it's becoming more and more dangerous to express what you really feel. Now, we don't get arrested, but we get deplatformed and we get targeted. And I got to be honest, I suspect things like the Michael Jackson situation, the allegations against him, and some of the sexual assault allegations that powerful men have to deal with. I think that's kind of how guys are dealt with when the shadow government, when the people in power want to fuck with somebody. I think that's how they do it. Just like, remember the Brett Kavanaugh situation, where he was about to become a Supreme Court justice. This lady comes out of nowhere with allegations that he sexually assaulted her back when they were in college. I mean, just some ridiculous shit. Why wait now? That's like our tyranny. That's how we have to deal with tyranny, because we can't just be shut down and arrested forcefully. So how do you do it? Oh, well, sexual assault allegation or deplatforming or something like that. And so this guy says, I was one of his first 1,000 subs. I spoke to him a few times. I liked him. He wasn't a saint, but he did have a sense of justice. I think he had health issues and he was dying, so it spurred on his urge to stay and speak the truth as he saw it. R.I.P. So another guy who says that he was sick during the time of his stay in the Ukraine. This guy says Gonzalo Lira's father confirmed his son's death to Tucker Carlson, who reported it on Twitter. According to note handwritten by Lira, on 4th of January, he had been sick with pneumonia since last October and had developed a pneumothorax and edema. He was transferred to hospital in December and he passed away sometime in the last 24 hours. So it seems he died of pneumonia. This guy seems to know what he's talking about. I didn't see this particular exchange between his father and Tucker Carlson, but I did see his father on a podcast. And so that's a funny picture there. Some good Being AI art. This guy says, have a lot of appreciation for the guy, but he was a fucking moron. Why the fuck would you think it was safe to talk against a known corrupt regime in their fucking homeland? Imagine Frodo and Sam starting a podcast against Sauron in the middle of Mordor, LMAO. And then he made it, and that's the beauty of AI art, bro. You get an idea, you just make it, throw it out there. That is hilarious. Okay. So this guy says, go to a foreign country that is at war, start spreading enemy propaganda, even go on RT, get arrested and then let off with a warning, decide to remain in the country and continue to break their laws. Talk at length about how oppressive the regime is. Whenever someone warns you of the legal risk of spreading enemy propaganda, accuse them of cowardice, get arrested a second time, get beat up by inmates who steal your money, get let out on bail, decide to skip bail and try to hop the border, get caught. Ukrainian government now denies you bail because you're a flight risk. You have to wait for trial in the jail cell. Catch pneumonia in jail cell, go to hospital for operation. Internet rumors start circulating that you died of pneumonia, profit, etc. Yeah, so this is a guy who just like, this moron, this idiot. Why would you do that? I mean, look, you got to admit, he had several chances to correct himself in a situation that he was in. But man, I just think there's something to be said about sticking to your guns to the very end. Then this guy says, rumors of Roach dead pills death haven't been independently confirmed, and the only source is some no-name blog that apparently talked to his dad. The truth is that he was part of the massive Ukraine-Russia prisoner swap because his GRU handlers want him back. So I think this guy is denying that he died, but doesn't like him either. But I'm not sure how true that is. So this guy says, what a retard. Did he think he was untouchable because he was a U.S. citizen? I don't know what he thought, but the fact they murdered an American citizen should have consequences. It should be Ukraine rather than the Houthis who should be bombed for this crime. But that'll never happen. If the Ukraine could have executed him, they could have beheaded him in a Ukrainian prison somewhere, and our government would never speak of it. They would never speak against it because they're too busy trying to prop Zelensky and his government up as being these heroes defending their country righteously, and they could do no wrong. You know, that's just what war is. You never paint your own side out to be bad in any way, shape, or form. Any sort of war crime or evil that is committed for the sake of advancing your own agenda is not going to be addressed. So of course we wouldn't do that. So this guy says, this whole thing shows that one, the Ukraine Zelensky regime are thugs just like everyone else. Human rights crap goes out the window as soon as your mouth is deemed a genuine threat. True. And two, Lira was a fucking idiot with no sense of self-preservation. Read the fucking room, dude. Psychopathic liars who bow to global homo have no problem castrating kids, so how did you expect to fare? You know, I think that second part depends on what he thought. And you know, in the video we watched, he said that maybe I shouldn't be saying this. So obviously he knew there was some danger. I guess it comes down to how much danger he actually knew that he was in. If he did everything that he did, knowing that he could die, knowing that there was a good chance he could die, then fine. But if he was delusional enough to think that he wasn't in great danger, that he was just going to ease out of the Ukraine after talking all that shit, especially after getting several warnings and getting detained and all these different things, then yeah, that would be delusion of the highest order. But with all that being said, at the end of the day, I agree with most of what he said about the war. Whatever you think of him as a person and his decision to say these things in the Ukraine, you got to admit that what he said, for the most part, was not bullshit. It was spot on. And, I think if we had more people who were willing to not only speak the truth, but to speak the truth and do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it could cost your life, then we wouldn't end up in these types of situations as often. These wars, we wouldn't end up getting riled up and incensed into fighting each other like apes the way that we do. But a big problem is that people just aren't willing to, one, think for themselves. And a lot of times that has to do with not being fed accurate information. But it's also a lack of courage. How many people out there in the Ukraine are, fighting against their will, but even then, as bad as I feel for them, I'm sure a lot of them, they just went ahead and allowed themselves to be captured. They allowed themselves to pick up a gun and start fighting instead of being one of the guys that's power slamming, press gangs in the street and running away or doing whatever they can to avoid fighting. So, it's all around a fucked up situation. But I think that it's a win for the red pill and it's a win for truth. And rest in peace to the Coach Red Pill, Mr. Gonzala. You will be missed. So that was the main topic and the TOD. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we are going to have comments, and then I'm going to get out of here. So stay tuned. Okay, so please. Oh, well, sort of. Okay, so now we have the comments, and then we will continue. So these are some old comments, by the way. These are some old comments that I wasn't able to address yet. So yeah, that's why you're gonna see these old ass comments. But let's get right to it. So Grand Admiral Gamma says on the Why is White Replacement Celebrated video, I don't agree with nor do I celebrate white replacement, but as a black man, I'm seen as an invasive species for simply trying to obtain the American dream that I worked for. There is no longer a happy medium, only extremism on both sides. Not a good time, if there ever was, to be an undesired minority. I think that it is time to acknowledge that the dream, both the MLK and American dream, is dead. It seems that way. Ultimately, I think that this is meant to light a fire under the right so that they can have a backlash, Turner Diary style. And I've heard similar speculation. But look at what he said, the MLK dream and the American dream is dead. And I think the MLK dream is the dream of peaceful coexistence between the races and culture. And you can argue that we've achieved that to a certain extent. I mean, you have all these interracial relationships and black kids going to school with white kids and all this stuff. But then you're also seeing the other side of it where, like, just for example, you see all these videos of young black people stealing from these stores brazenly, no mask, no nothing, just running in there and stealing. And then you see these type of clips get posted on Twitter all the time. And then now I'm starting to notice like white people and other races realize, like, why is it always black people who are doing this? You know, and I think just certain truths about the differences between our cultures and things like, and we all know this, the gun violence and the difference between the gun deaths in the black community versus the white community, especially considering our much smaller population in comparison, yet we commit much more gun violence in them. You know, people are starting to realize and take notice of things like that. And I think it's an example of our failure to really completely peacefully coexist as complete equals, you know, because I think some of these differences are creating friction between races, whether it's spoken of or not. And I think as far as the American dream, you know, I think that's the white American dream, where they had control of their own country and they had the power and things like that. And now even white people are looking around like, wait a minute, we're not in control. We're not able to stop all these people coming across the border. We're not able to stop our government from sending money to Ukraine and Israel. And, you know, even the white side of the fence is realizing that they don't even have control of the country. They can't afford to pay rent. They can afford to buy groceries. They have to live back at home with their parents, just like everybody else. And, you know, a lot of things are changing for the worse in this country, regardless. But like he said, is there going to be a major backlash from the right? I don't know. Maybe January 6th was just a precursor of things to come. And so God Nova says on the Why is White Replacement Celebrated video, bro, it's hard for you to see what's going on because of how we've been brainwashed by the media. White people ain't backed into a corner. They built the corner. And you know what? This is absolutely true. This is absolutely true. That's a great point. Because even though on one hand, I feel for my white brothers and how they're in this position where they can't really express racial pride the same way the other races can. At the end of the day, it's on them. It's on everybody to stand up for themselves and what they believe in and what they stand on. And I think the problem is so many white people, they bought into these narratives. They bought into white guilt and things like that. And to an extent, white people have to be held accountable for that, you know. And I think that it's just that so few people really talk about this, you know, the whole white replacement thing, and just some of the ridiculousness. And just like that clip I showed you of that guy saying, you know, you know, that guy, I think it was in Ireland, and the guy was like, oh, this politician is white and this leader is white, and right. And if a white person did the same thing in a predominantly black or Islamic or Asian country, it would never be accepted. And, you know, I got to say, I don't like it, but white people, they accept it. You know, they pretty much have raised their hands and backed into the corner themselves. If you really think about it, they accepted it and they go along with it. So that's absolutely a good point. So Kimosabi says on the same video, the reason why it's celebrated is because there is more support towards the replacement than there is opposition towards it. There's more companies, corporations who will take the money, ESG score, CEI score, which is very real, from replacing primarily white characters in their media properties. There's more politicians that are okay with funneling migrants into predominantly white areas that are nowhere near where they reside. There are more white people that are indoctrinated, afraid of even speaking out about these topics. And there are more minorities who perceive this culture shift as their time to shine as progression, and not as politically business fueled propaganda. Yeah, it's a numbers game. And I think the numbers have just shifted so much. And it's just like Nova said previously. You gotta put a lot of this on white people, you know, because I think there's been so much focus on the far right side of things, which, you know, these guys are more outspoken about what they believe to be the truth about white replacement, pride in their own race and things like that. But let's not forget the left side, the liberals, And those are the ones who are going to be more welcoming of these policies. You know, whenever you have these mass influxes of immigrants, you can see in these different, like, predominantly white countries, you would see white liberals with signs up, "We welcome the immigrants, welcome, hello," like they would welcome that shit. You know, I think even when Italy was going through that, like when they was experiencing this earlier last year or in the middle of last year, they had people standing out there with signs like welcoming them, even though there were some people who obviously didn't want to deal with that. In fact, the whole reasoning for electing the president that they have now was because they thought that she would do something about the illegal immigration, which she isn't. But yeah, I think it's like you said, man. It's the tide has just turned so far in that direction that you know, this is where we are. Something so ridiculous has been normalized, and it's unfortunate. And then Lurker 5947 says, "I hope this doesn't get taken down. LOL." It didn't. Luckily, man, I was scared. I was scared, but you know what? I think my skin color saved me on this one. I think being black helped me with this one. I can't even lie, bro. I think that's the only reason why I put a black face up there. Like, what you gonna do? Boy, if I was looking like Cody or Aiden, then it might have gotten taken down. So Simba Trey 4541 says on the Process Pull the Ripcord video, "Damn man, do Life is Neat, Night Walk, or Dinner with the Folks my faves." I just did Dinner with the Folks. I got to go back and find Night Walk and Life is Neat. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't know if I still have the original file for the Life is Neat beat. I hope I do. I really do. But I remember I've had computer malfunctions in the past where I lost old stuff. I have like 90 to 95% of everything I've ever made from when I first started rapping to now. But some of the things that I lost were the original sessions for my early songs. I keep all these now. But I know I lost like some of them, but I got to see if there was a big loss around the time when I put out Life is Neat. I may or may not have it, but we'll see. And so on the Neat and Chill stream, Bobby Bureau 7452 says, "We are at the point in internet history where all has been said and done. The red pill rage is past, and all we can do is have chill streams. Not gonna lie, I kind of like this." Yes, yes, I like that. You know, and I don't stream enough for you guys, and I'm gonna definitely try to stream more. And it's February now, so definitely expect a stream or two before the month is out. I might even stream this weekend. So Samurai J707 says on the seasonal depression video, "I used to not think that seasonal depression was real until winter this year. It's hard to be motivated when it's cold and dark at 5 p.m. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it has hit me like a brick in the last 2 years. And I think that it's been more noticeable now because I've been just better about being like consistently productive. And one thing seasonal depression does is that it kills my ability to be productive. And that's why I really noticed it this time. I really noticed it because I had a big drop in my productivity. You know, I know how to generally cope with depression when I am feeling down, but I was really able to identify it this time because I've just been much better about structuring my day and sticking to a routine. And that's hard to do when you're depressed. I can cope, but to be productive about being depressed, that's something I haven't really quite figured out. But going into next year, I'm going to make sure that I'm more prepared. Moving from summer to fall, I got to make sure that I'm ready for that. And so on the Riz video, Kimosabi says, "Riz is just the Zoomers version of game. These Riz TikToks are the equivalent of PUAs in public vids. The detrimental part of these TikToks is how they give Zoomers a false sense of confidence where if they say the right things, they will get the girl, as well as only telling them what they do in that moment and not how to establish the relationship or take it further. Yeah, that's always the big problem with the game. The whole idea of game. I'm not saying that game isn't real. There's definitely a certain art to, you know, your conversational skills. We call it the mouthpiece and things like that. But I think this video in particular is just not a good example, because what you really have is a young man that approached a girl who was already attracted to him. He didn't really say or do anything special outside of making the approach. I think if anything, it just shows the value of being willing to try and make an approach. Because maybe the girl that you like, maybe she saw you and maybe she liked you too. You know, maybe. You know, I think that's the best thing you could probably take from this video. But I think to call it Riz, and really the problem here is the narrative. You know, if I was gonna put this video out and try to use it to motivate young men, I would say, look what can happen when you shoot your shot. That's how, right? I'm not trying to be Mr. Negative here. There's a way to take this and give it the right narrative and spin it the right way to motivate. And it's not to say, oh, he got the Riz, he got the game, no. He approached the girl who already found him attractive and had to put in minimal effort to seal the deal. That's the reality of it. Now, if you want to motivate somebody and inspire young men to do something, then again, put the right narrative there. This is what happens when you shoot your shot. This is what can happen if you try. The girl you like might like you back. That's what you do. You don't have to go with this bullshit Riz stuff. And so Rap Shout says on the same video, since I started working and going outside, it's actually crazy the amount of so-called manlets, 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", oh, that's me, who have kids and families, but my main perception was mainly filled with R9K black pills. Well, you know, look, this is kind of the problem with the black pill that I see, is that some people buy into the exaggerations. Like these ideas that you have to be 6 foot tall to get laid or to get girls. And I think you got to have a more balanced view, because I think when it comes to stuff like height, the truth is, you know, and not just height, but race, facial structure, facial symmetry, body fat, the shape of your body. You know, black pill primarily focuses on the physical aspect of attraction, the looks department. And while a lot of that is true, most of that just gives you different advantages. It gives you different advantages and puts you at disadvantages. And so when you're talking about height, it's one of those things where being tall is definitely an advantage when it comes to attracting the opposite sex. Not only that, but height has also been associated with greater success in business and different endeavors in life all around. But that doesn't mean that you can't reproduce or get girlfriends or get married at 5'7", 5'8", 5'9". That's the problem with the black pill, is that if you don't have the mind to understand when things are being exaggerated, when you don't have enough of interacting with reality under your belt to see, you know, the counterpoints, then yeah, you'll make the mistake of thinking, oh, if you're 5'8", you're not gonna have kids. You're not like that, and that's ludicrous. But I think it's just as ludicrous on the other side when you have normies who say these things don't matter. They absolutely do matter. But they're simply advantages and disadvantages. They're not things that are going to typically completely prevent somebody from having any success in dating whatsoever. You know, it's like I go to Walmart, and Walmart is full of illegal immigrants. And a lot, man, those Mexicans from Mexico, they are tiny. They are so small. I'm only 5'8". Most of those guys like 5'6", 5'5", but they all have girlfriends or wives that are a little bit shorter than them. They have kids, and things like that. So again, that's why you got to have that balance of research and analyzing lookism, but also, being in reality and seeing how things can work out for the less privileged. And so Sleeper 9638 says, on the seasonal depression video, bro, look into vitamin D3. It is medically proven that black people have a harder time synthesizing vitamin D in environments that have lower sunlight exposure compared to the very large amounts of sun exposure they're adapted to having in Africa. Vitamin D is important for hormone regulation and testosterone production, which will both affect your mood if your levels are low. Even though it's called a vitamin, it's actually considered a hormone because of this. And as you can imagine, an imbalanced hormonal profile generally results in mood fluctuations. In countries that spend most of their winter days in the dark, like in Northern Europe, it is actually recommended to supplement a small amount of vitamin D specifically because of this. Seasonal depression is the most prominent in countries that experience large fluctuations in the amount of daylight they have throughout the year, with the lack of sunlight starting later in the year, which is when seasonal depression always occurs. In countries that are constantly sunny, the concept of seasonal depression is rare. And thank you for that information, Sleeper 9638. And you know what? That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm glad you reminded me, because I remember somebody mentioning vitamin D, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go get some. I never got any, but now, and in fact, I think my mom actually has some, so I might go up there right after this and grab some. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna start just taking vitamin D, and not even just doing the winter, but doing the just throughout the year. And I just recently started taking multivitamins again, but I'm gonna definitely add some vitamin D to that, particularly during the colder months, because it's something about fall and winter, man. Like, luckily though, because now we're on the tail end of winter by the recording of this video, which is February. And after I went through that seasonal depression, I was able to, pull myself back together relatively well, I would say. And it didn't really last long. It was like 2.5 weeks, something like that. But still, moving forward, definitely going to start eating and stuffing myself with vitamin D during the colder months. But so far, I've been able to, sustain a good and healthy balance of mental health and mood during the later part of winter. So thank you for that. And here we have Merlin Wilco 1006 on the Never Trust Code Approach, normies. This is the most absurd take I've ever heard. Look, and just hear me out. But seriously, and I'm gonna do a video about this, but people always shame men for not wanting to approach women and not having the confidence to do so. And in that little short, I was explaining how the same people who shame men for not approaching women, they would never bet money that the women they approach would actually say yes or accept a date with them. And what I'm expressing here is that the guys who have this fear, they understand this as well. And so it's like this cycle of doubt where you expect rejection. Therefore, how are you supposed to develop confidence to make the approach? And if you can't even wrap your mind around that, again, put money on it. Would you put money on a guy making an approach and a girl saying yes? Most people would not put money on it because they don't have the confidence either. They don't have the confidence in you either. But I'll make a video about that. That's a good topic. And so on the Life is Neat video, people still comment on this. Svay Gaming says, why y'all say RIP? He decided to kill himself. He could just have not done it. I feel bad for his mom. They're talking about Shuabi here. LOL. And then Elk Yaron says, what a stupid thing to say. I bet you've never felt the same way he felt. You've never felt real loneliness and never been feel apart. I wish he rest in peace, and every person that made that decision rest in peace. That's what he was looking for. And I wish that he is resting in peace with himself. You are probably like 12 years old. One day you will understand real struggle and real suffering. as a person who is still fighting, your comment makes nothing but anger for me. Hate when people say shit like that. And you know, Shuabi was really young. He was like 18 or something like that. And you know, I had suicidal thoughts throughout, I would say from, I think like 17 to my early 20s, sporadically. But I think 18, 19 was definitely the worst time for me. And as you know, I ended up in the mental hospital when I was like 22, 23, something like that. I think like 22, somewhere around there. And after I got out, it was a slow rebuilding process of my mental health and, you know, taking steps to make sure that, you know, I didn't have to go back. And, you know, I ended up becoming a very happy person, to say the least. But, you know, it's amazing when you look at how far I've come, though. You know, I have people who are really, you know, they really admire me for my positive attitude and the way I'm able to sustain, you know, a relatively high level of happiness throughout the year or throughout, you know, just my life up to this point. And some of these people, you know, more successful in life than I am, but they still find that to be admirable. And, you know, I think that being someone who, you know, used to feel the way that Shuabi did, at least somewhat, you know, because I had, man, real shit, I had the exit bag under the bed. I had the helium tank and all that shit ready to, like, let me tell you, I was there, bro. And yeah, even someone like myself, who's like the image of joy and jolliness, used to be in those dark places. So, you know, I definitely understand it, man. It's unfortunate because I think that had he given himself more time and maybe even a change of environment, he probably would, you know, would still be alive today and might even be as happy, if not more happy, than I am. I think the most unfortunate thing about it is that he gave up so early. He gave up on himself before he gave himself the opportunity to make things better. You know, and of course, still, it's bad for his mom and his family as well, because she had to find him. It was just all around terrible. And it's crazy how this whole situation is attached to this damn song. Man, and to this day, I hope it doesn't bite me in the ass when somebody is like, you're the reason. It's like, come on, man. It's a song, a dope song, but it's a song. Okay, and so on the Why on Pro Porn video, Intellectual Shepherd Club says, you seem to have upset a lot of trad sales, Chad. And then Probnot 9476 says, speaking as a porn addict, I didn't really watch the video. Porn is not the move. It is simply a non-substitute for real life affection. Note how I said non-substitute, because not only can it not replace intimacy in real life, but it has the potential to prevent you from being the best you that you can be. And so I'll say this. I don't look at pornography as being like a one-for-one substitute, at least not in its current state. It's evolving with AI and all that shit, so beware. But I don't look at it as a one-for-one substitute. I look at it as a fun vice to enjoy. We're sexual creatures. We like sex in many different shapes and forms. You know, prostitution is the oldest profession in history, or what is it? The oldest profession in mankind. What's that saying? Whatever, however it goes. And then you have places like gentlemen clubs and strip clubs and whatnot, where people just enjoy sensuality and sexuality and things like that. And that's just how I look at porn. I look at porn as almost like a celebration, and maybe not a celebration, but just a way to enjoy our sexuality and to enjoy sex. Now, obviously, it's not on the same level as being in a real intimate, affectionate relationship. But I think at the same time, it doesn't come with the same risk as that as well. And looking at it from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of men who would agree that, you know, dating in the modern era is very problematic, where a lot of guys are suffering and going through a lot of bullshit because of their relationships, because of their wives, or going through a divorce, or going through a breakup, or having to sustain a relationship and a woman that's very demanding. I mean, toxic relationships and all these things. I mean, you know, whatever problems come with pornography, oh man, the problems are 10 times, 20 times, 30 times worse when you're talking about engaging in actual relationships in the modern era. But of course, it can be the exact opposite too. Some relationships are healthy and fruitful and things like that. But again, when I use pornography, I'm not using it as a one-for-one substitute for real life affection. For me, it's just a fun way to enjoy my sexuality. And that's exactly just what it is. And I think a lot of people who are anti-porn, you know, they kind of have a similar viewpoint as this guy, where, you know, they just, for them, the only normal righteous way to enjoy your sexuality is with a partner. And I just don't agree. I think sexuality can be enjoyed solo, by yourself, with masturbation and pornography. If we don't see eye to eye on that, then it is what it is. But I do agree when he says that pornography has the potential to prevent you from being the best that you can be. But I think you can say that about any vice, because, you know, make no mistake, pornography definitely is a vice. But that's not something that's unique to pornography. You can say that about cigarettes. You can say that about alcohol. You can say that about weed. You can say that about video games. You can say that about sex. You can say that about a relationship. Look, my friend is in a toxic relationship that's preventing him from being the best that he can be. So again, it's just all this energy and negativity is aimed against pornography does not make sense to me. Because just about every problem people present to me in regards to pornography is either exaggerated or can be applied to other vices that people don't have the same hate or energy or negative energy towards. So until somebody convinces me otherwise, I'm going to be pro-porn. And so Caitlin Koenig 848 says on the 10 cult classic horror movie recommendations video, I've seen all these, including Inferno. I thought it was a beautiful fucking movie. It's pretty awesome. However, I can't help but believe Suspiria steals the show. It is absolutely perfect in my eyes. Also, Deep Red, also known as Profondo Rosso, is a masterpiece. It made me scream when it revealed who the killer was. It is one of the best reveals. Here is a real old school cult classic horror movie aficionado. I love it. But yeah, man, I gotta recommend Deep Red. I mean, it's pretty long, and I'm not gonna say it's the most exciting movie, but I mean, you want to watch a good whodunit horror movie? I mean, it doesn't get much better. It does not get much better than Deep Red. I'm telling you, your jaw is going to fall and hit the ground when you see it. I can almost guarantee you will never catch it. It's going to hit you in the back of the head for sure. But definitely an appreciator of cult classic horror movies. Gotta love it. And so last but not least, we have Trash Face Trace. And Trash Face Trace says, this is a neat list. I have only heard of 2 or 3 of these, and I really appreciate some uncommon recs. Thanks for talking about whether there were some themes of SA. I think that's sexual assault. That's very helpful. I'm assuming this individual wants to avoid movies with sexual assault. And I gotta say, man, I love horror movies, but it's something about stuff like that. And look, I'll watch it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not gonna shy away from it. But it is one of those themes that really hits me in the gut, you know. That's why I have a hard time watching stuff like I'll Spit on Your Grave twice, because it's just something about sexual assault that's just like extra dark for me. But I'm glad you appreciated that cult classic horror movie list, Trash Face Trace. I love to see an appreciator of the classics. But that is it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you on the next Botcast. Now, I do have an idea for what it's going to be, but I'm still ironing out the fine details. But just a quick spoiler alert, is going to be an interview. If all things goes well, that is. So Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you on the next episode of the Botcast. So, Johnny.